I was on my way back from a work trip to Calgary when I stopped at a 24-hour Shoppers Drug Mart, about 10 minutes from our apartment, to pick up her favorite thing. A bottle of that grapefruit sparkling water she always kept in the fridge, and a small bunch of tulips they had sitting near the entrance. Nothing fancy, just the kind of thing you do when you've been away for 4 days and you miss someone. It was a Tuesday night, a little past 11. I had texted her from the airport that my flight landed early, but she didn't reply. I figured she was already asleep. She wasn't. I heard them before I reached the bedroom door. I stood in the hallway of my own apartment with a plastic bag in one hand and tulips in the other. And I stood there long enough that the cold from the shopper's bag started to seep into my fingers. I set everything down on the hallway table quietly, the same way you put a glass down when you don't want to make a sound. Then I opened the door. I won't describe what I saw. You already know what I saw. What I will tell you is that the person in my bed with my fiancé was my best friend. We had been best friends since we were 14 years old. He was supposed to be my best man at our wedding in September. His name was Harlan, and I had known him for almost 20 years. I didn't yell. I didn't throw anything. I looked at both of them for about 3 seconds, long enough to make sure I was seeing what I was seeing. That my brain wasn't doing something wrong. And then I turned around, walked back down the hallway, picked up the tulips and the sparkling water, went into the kitchen, put the flowers in a glass of water on the counter, put the grapefruit drink in the fridge, and sat down at the kitchen table. I sat there for 45 minutes. My fiancée. I'll call her my fiancée, because I'm not going to give her a name she doesn't deserve in this story, came out at some point, wrapped in the sheet I had bought at IKEA 2 years ago, and stood in the kitchen doorway. Harlan had apparently left through the front door. While I was sitting at the table, I didn't hear him go. She said, "I can explain." I said, "Don't." She said, "Please just listen to me." I said, "I need you to go back into the bedroom, get dressed and leave. I'm going to sit here." She stood there for another minute. Then she went back in. I heard the sounds of someone getting dressed very quickly. She came back through with her bag over her shoulder, and she stopped in the kitchen doorway again, and she looked at me and I looked at the table. "This wasn't supposed to happen," she said. I didn't say anything. She left. I sat at the kitchen table until about 2 in the morning. Then I went to bed. I stripped the sheets off and put them directly into a garbage bag, and slept on the spare settee with a throw blanket from the couch. I slept for maybe 3 hours. I want to be very clear about something before I keep going, because it matters to the rest of this story. Harlan wasn't just my best friend in the casual sense. He was the person I had called when my grandfather died. He was the person who drove me to the hospital at 3 in the morning when I thought I was having a heart attack, and it turned out to be a panic attack. He was the person who helped me move into that apartment, who knew the code to my building, who had a key to my unit because I had given it to him the previous year when I went to Vancouver for a month for work and needed someone to water my plants. He had a key to my apartment. I had given it to him. That's the part that kept sitting in my chest like something heavy. The next morning I called a locksmith. I didn't call Harlan. I didn't text my fiancée. I went to work, came home, and began the quiet and very deliberate process of untangling my life from theirs. There was a lot to untangle. Harlan and I had a storage unit together, one of those climate-controlled ones, near the highway outside the city, that we had split because neither of us had room for all our outdoor gear. We each paid half. I called the facility, explained the situation, gave them my credit card, and had my name removed from the shared account. I sent Harlan an e-transfer for his portion of the remaining months, and blocked him on everything before he could respond. My fiancée and I had a joint bank account we'd opened together 18 months earlier when we started talking seriously about the wedding. We had both been putting money into it every month for the venue deposit, the caterer, the photographer. There was almost $14,000 in it. I went to the bank the morning after I got back from Calgary before work and spoke to an advisor. She explained that because it was a joint account, I couldn't remove her without her consent, but I could remove myself, which I did. I transferred my half out and closed my access. I sent my fiancée an e-transfer for her portion with a note that said only, "Your share, account closed on my end." She called me twice. I didn't answer. Then there was the matter of the lease. We had signed a 2-year lease together 8 months earlier. Both of our names were on it. I spoke to a tenant rights advisor. Ontario law is fairly specific about this, and learned that the cleanest option was for one of us to take over the lease entirely, which required the landlord's approval, or to break it together. I sent my fiancée a single email explaining the situation and asking her to contact the landlord. She did. It took 3 weeks to sort out, but she found a roommate, and the landlord agreed to let her take over the lease in her name alone. I moved into a furnished 1-bedroom near Yonge and Eglinton that I found on Kijiji, and paid month to month while I figured out next steps. None of this is the part of the story that broke me. This is the part of the story that broke me. About a week after I got back from Calgary, I called my oldest friend in the world. A woman I'll call my cousin, because that's what she is. And because she has always been the person in my family I trusted most. And I told her what happened. I needed to tell someone. I needed to say it out loud to a person who knew me. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Harlan called your parents." I didn't say anything. She said, "He called them before you even got back to Toronto. He told them his version first." I asked her what his version was. She said, "He told them it was complicated. That things had been broken between you and your fiancé for a long time. That he hadn't meant for it to happen." I was very still on the phone. "And your parents?" I asked. Another long pause. Then she said, "Your mom wants you to sit down with him. To hear him out. She said you've been friends for 20 years and you shouldn't throw that away." I hung up the phone. Not at my cousin. I said goodbye to her. Then I sat in my empty furnished apartment. And I looked at the rental furniture someone else had picked out. And I felt something shift in my chest. Something I didn't have a name for at the time. My mother called me the next morning. I let it go to voicemail. She left a message that I have since deleted, but the gist of it was, Harlan was like a son to them. He was clearly struggling with what happened and it took courage to call them. Relationships are complicated. People make mistakes. I was being too rigid. My father called that evening. His message was shorter. "Son, you need to pick up the phone. Running away from this isn't going to fix anything." I wasn't running away from anything. I was sitting in a furnished apartment on Yonge Street eating takeout from the Vietnamese place downstairs and reviewing the paperwork for breaking my lease. That's not running. That's just continuing to exist. I called my mother back 2 days later. I waited until I felt calm enough to speak without my voice doing anything strange. I said, "I need to understand something. Your position is that I should sit down with a man who slept with the woman I was going to marry, in my own apartment, in my own bed, and hear him out. Is that accurate?" She said, "That's not what I said. I said that after 20 years. I said that's what you said." She said, "You're being very cold about this." I said, "Mum, I came home from a work trip. I bought her flowers. I found them in our bedroom. There is no version of this where he made a mistake. There's no miscommunication here. I need you to understand what you're asking me to do." She was quiet, then she said, "He called us. He was devastated. He said he couldn't live with himself." And something in me just went flat. Like a light going off. "Then that's his problem to solve," I said. "Not mine." I didn't speak to my parents for 3 months after that. Here is what I haven't mentioned yet. I was at the time, making a reasonable living as a software project manager for a mid-sized tech company based in Waterloo. And I had been for the previous 4 years, quietly and without much fanfare, helping Harlan's family. Not dramatically. Not in a way that anyone would have noticed from the outside. Harlan's younger brother, a genuinely good kid, 22 years old, in his second year at Ryerson, had applied for a student line of credit the previous winter. His credit history was this and his parents wasn't much better. Harlan had asked me, over beers one night in January, if I would co-sign. He said it would be for 18 months, just long enough for his brother to establish his own credit history, and then they'd refinance and get my name off it. I said yes, because Harlan was my best friend. Because I trusted him. Because that is what you do for people you've known for 20 years. His brother's line of credit was for $12,000 through a major bank. My name was on it. There was also a matter of a referral I had made the previous autumn. Harlan had been between jobs, and I had vouched for him personally with a senior director at my company, a woman who had gone to school with my manager and trusted my judgment explicitly. Harlan had gotten a contract position. He was still in that position when everything happened. I didn't do anything about any of this immediately. I want to be clear about that. I wasn't sitting in my furnished apartment constructing a plan. I was just trying to get through each day, without the weight in my chest getting heavier. But over time, I started thinking clearly again. And thinking clearly meant looking at my situation honestly. The co-sign on the student line of credit. I spoke to my bank. Under Canadian banking regulations, a co-signer cannot simply remove themselves from an existing loan. The primary borrower has to refinance, or the account has to be closed and reopened. I sent Harlan's brother a single, factual email explaining this, and giving him 90 days notice that I intended to contact the bank and request a formal review of my co-signer status, and that he should begin the process of refinancing in his own name or with a different co-signer. I was not cruel about it. His brother had done nothing wrong. I kept the email professional. The referral at work was simpler. I sent an email to the director and explained, briefly and without detail, that my personal relationship with Harlan had ended, that I was withdrawing my personal endorsement, and that any future decisions about his contract renewal were entirely at the company's discretion without my involvement. That was all I said. I didn't embellish. I didn't explain. His contract was not renewed. I found this out later through my cousin, who was still in contact with people on the periphery of that social circle. She told me in a fairly matter-of-fact way, as if she was reading a weather report. Harlan lost the contract, she said. And his brother is stressed about the line of credit. Okay, I said. His parents called your mom, she said. Also okay, I said. My mother called me that same week. The first time in about a month, and she was not calm. She said that I had destroyed Harlan's career, that his family was in a financial panic over the line of credit, and that what I had done was worse than what he had done to me because at least, he hadn't been calculating. I let her finish. Then I said, he had a key to my apartment, Mum. A key I gave him, and he used it to betray me. And you called that complicated. I withdrew a personal referral from a workplace and declined to keep co-signing a loan. That's not calculation, that's consequence. She didn't have an answer for that, she said. He's like a son to us, I said. He's not your son. I am. That was the most important thing I said during that entire period. I've thought about it a lot since. I'm not sure my mother heard it the way I meant it, but I know I meant it. I moved to Ottawa 6 months later. My company had an office there and I had asked to transfer. My manager approved it within a week. I was good at my job and they didn't want to lose me. I found a 2-bedroom apartment in Centretown. A good street, walking distance to the canal, and I started over the way you start over when you're in your early 30s and you still have most of your life in front of you. Which is to say, quietly, practically, and with a lot of pasta from the place on Bank Street that stays open late. I made new friends slowly. I went to a trivia night at a pub near my building and ended up talking to a woman named, well, I'll call her my colleague, because she actually works in the same industry. And I don't want to make her part of this story. She became a friend, a real one, the kind you can call when something goes sideways and they just say, okay, tell me without making it about themselves. I did not date anyone for a long time. I wasn't ready, that's just the truth. About a year after I moved to Ottawa, my cousin called me on a Sunday afternoon. I was making soup, the long kind, with a ham hock you have to simmer for 3 hours, and I had music on and I almost didn't pick up, but I did. I need to tell you something, she said. She had been keeping loose tabs on the situation back in Toronto, not because I asked her to, but because that's how my cousin is. She's the kind of person who keeps track of things in the background and only surfaces when it matters. Harlan had been out of steady work for close to 8 months by then. The client he'd found after the contract ended hadn't worked out. He'd been freelancing, but apparently without much success. His family had managed to refinance his brother's line of credit, without my name on it. But the rate was significantly higher, and they were stretched thin. My parents had been lending them money. Not large amounts, but money. Enough that it had started to affect my parents' own planning. They had been going to a cottage in Muskoka every August for 12 years, renting the same place, same 2 weeks. It was practically a family institution. They had canceled it that year because they couldn't justify the expense. When my cousin told me this, I felt something I hadn't expected to feel. Not satisfaction, not vindication. Just a deep and quiet sadness. Because my parents had had a choice. They had chosen to keep lending money to a man who betrayed their son, and then called them first to manage the narrative. And that choice had costs for them. Real ones. I called my parents that evening. It was the first real conversation I had with them in months. Not short check-ins, not polite exchanges, but an actual sit-down kind of call. My father answered. I know about the cottage, I said. A pause. Your cousin told you. She did. Another pause. Then my dad said something I hadn't expected. He said, I don't know when it got so out of hand. I was quiet. We thought we were helping, he said. We thought, if just kept things stable, eventually everyone would come around. You'd forgive him, he'd get back on his feet. I said, did you think about asking me what I needed? He said nothing for a moment. Then he said no. I suppose we didn't. That was its own kind of grief. Sitting on the phone in my Ottawa apartment listening to my dad admit that. He's not a man who says things like that easily. He's a certain kind of Ontario small city dad. Practical, reserved, more comfortable fixing a car than talking about his feelings. For him to say that was significant. We talked for almost 2 hours. My mother joined partway through. It wasn't a resolution. Exactly. These things don't resolve cleanly in real life, regardless of what anyone tells you. But it was honest. My mother cried. My father was very quiet for long stretches. I told them as plainly as I could what the year had felt from my side, not to punish them, just because they needed to hear it, and I needed to say it. 3 weeks later, I got a message from Harlan. It came through a secondary Instagram account. Not his main one, which I had blocked. Just a short message through a profile that was barely set up. Clearly made for this purpose. He must have thought about it for a long time before sending it. I don't know, I can only guess. It said, I've been going back and forth about sending this for months. I know you don't want to hear from me, and I'm not asking you to respond. I just need to say it. What I did was not a mistake. I made a choice, and it was a terrible one. And I've had to live with that. I spent a long time telling myself it was complicated because I didn't want to admit it was just wrong. Your parents kept telling me you'd come around eventually. I stopped believing that a while ago. I think what I actually believed was that your life was going to keep going smoothly, and I could stay in your orbit without ever really earning it. I didn't understand what it cost you to have me around. I do now. I'm sorry. That's all. I read it 3 times. Then I put my phone face down on the kitchen counter and went back to doing the dishes. I didn't respond. I still haven't. Not because I wanted to punish him. Not because I was holding on to anger. I wasn't. Not anymore. It was more that I had already spent a year building a life that didn't have him in it. A life that was quieter and smaller in some ways but mine in a way that the previous one hadn't been for a while without my realizing it. And there was nothing in that message that required a response. He said he wasn't asking for one. I believed him. I kept the message though. I don't know why. Maybe because it was the first time in the entire year that anyone in that situation had said something plainly true. My parents came to visit Ottawa that fall. The first time either of them had visited since I moved. We went for a walk along the canal on a Saturday afternoon. The leaves were at that specific peak of orange and red that only lasts about 4 days. And you always feel lucky if you catch it. My mother linked her arm through mine. The way she used to. When I was a kid and we walked like that for a while without saying anything. At some point she said, "We didn't handle it well." I said no. She said, "We were trying to keep the peace." I said, "I know." She said, "You were the one who needed us." Yes, I said I was. She squeezed my arm. We kept walking. That's not nothing. It's not everything, but it's not nothing. I'm still in Ottawa. I still make the long soup on Sundays when the weather turns cold. I still work for the same company, now as a senior project lead. And I like my job in a way I didn't entirely used to. I joined a recreational hockey league in the winter. I hadn't played since university and I am genuinely not very good, but there is something about being on ice at 7:30 on a Wednesday morning with a group of people who are also not very good that is deeply uncomplicated. And I have come to love uncomplicated things. I'm seeing someone now. About 7 months in. She's patient and funny and she asks good questions and she doesn't fill silence with noise just to fill it. I haven't introduced her to my parents yet, but I will, probably in the spring. The tulips I bought at Shoppers that night are long gone, obviously. But I think about them sometimes. I think about setting them down on the hallway table in the dark, and the fact that I set them gently, and the fact that even then, even in that moment, I didn't throw them or slam them down or do anything dramatic. I just set them down. I think that was probably the truest version of me in that whole story. The person who put the tulips down carefully, and then went and did what needed to be done,